Welcome to the Hustle or Bust podcast powered by Paver Art. Our mission is simple: to dive deep into the world of entrepreneurship, small business, and all the success, struggle, and challenges that need to be confronted in the pursuit of growth. We celebrate the entrepreneurial spirit, but perhaps most important, we want you to learn at least one idea that you can put into action immediately to make your investment in time worthwhile. On our 10th episode, we couldn't be more thrilled to introduce our first guest. Angelo Viscoso personifies the term entrepreneur. At the ripe old age of 25, Angelo decided to leave a great position in corporate America to pursue one of the most challenging ventures in America, the restaurant business in the New York metro market. Not only has he defied the odds of survival, but he's found a way to thrive for over 25 years. We hope you find inspiration in Angelo's story. We sure did. Well, hello again, everybody, and welcome to the Hustle or Bust podcast, powered by Paver Art, where the old school meets the new school. My name's Mike Bull. His name is Mark Oliveto. And shout out number 88 today for our producer, Dominic Oliveto. Well, this is a momentous occasion for our podcast. Let's just be honest. We've never done this before. This is our very first interview, and it's a very close friend of yours. Why don't you introduce him?
So I will introduce Angelo. He's a great friend of mine. I met him at Northeastern University. What, Ange, 92 or 93? Was our first
92.
year?
Yeah, 92.
92, and it was a 5-year program. We both graduated together. We lived together for 5 years. We graduated in 1997. Ange, I'm going to let you tell your story in terms of what you majored in. And what I love to do, you're a small business owner, and we want to get into that. But why don't you give a little background into what you studied at college, what you did after college, and, so tell your story however you'd like to.
Yeah, so thanks, guys. Happy to be here. Sounds like it's going to be a little fun hour or so here. So, yeah, we graduated Northeastern in, I think, 97.
Yep.
Went to school for mechanical engineering. I focused in the medical field towards the later years through our co-op program. I graduated, went to work for a medical company down in New Jersey called, it was a division of Stryker called Osteonics, doing hip replacements and knee replacements. Did that for about a year and a half. Grew up in the business before that. I grew up in, my parents have a pizzeria restaurant in Brooklyn, New York.
Hey, can I stop you there real quick, Ange?
Yeah.
Your parents, your father came over from Italy, right?
Yeah, they both did. Yep.
What year was that? When did he come over? Tell me real quick about your parents' story coming over from Italy.
My parents, my dad came over, I think he was like 17. Basically, just him and his brother came over, had a distant relative in the States here in New York, came over like typical immigrants, worked 2 shifts, worked actually a manufacturing job and a pizzeria job at night. And, came with the typical story with some change in his pocket and lived the American dream. It all worked out for him. From there, he wound up having an opportunity to go partners in a pizzeria with the guys that he worked with. And that was like his break. So he got in there, and then eventually he wound up opening his own business, and that's where I kind of grew up in.
How many years do you think it took your dad before he became a partner in a restaurant?
That's a good question. I don't think it wasn't very long. I don't think it was probably, if I were to guess, within like 3 to 5 years.
Wow.
If that, around there.
It classic American story, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Come over from a different country, you find a job, and then you get ownership. I mean, it's an amazing story.
Yeah.
How old would you estimate?
They actually met here. My mother came over. They actually met like in, I think, like English school or something like that.
To learn a language.
To learn a language.
Well, your dad came over when he was 17.
Yep.
First of all, that's unbelievable.
So she came over. My mom's 2 years older, so she was about, I think she did come over when she was about 19, 20 years old. She worked for Alitalia, the airline company. She worked there. They met, got married, had me, 2 other brothers I have. And my dad's been running his own business. He had a couple businesses over the years. but he's been at the current business now since I think the 80s. So a long run there at that business.
How old was he when he started, when he got into the partnership the first time?
I would say within like under 25,
Wow.
24, maybe something like that.
Amazing story.
Yeah.
All right, so now let's fast forward to you again. So we graduated in '97. You joined
Yeah, so
Osteonics.
Exactly. So worked for Osteonics. Well, just to back up, I worked because my dad had a pizzeria business. I was like one of those kids that grew up in the kitchen sink, right? I was always there, helping out, messing around in the back, getting in trouble. But as you got older, you started doing like busser. I think I was like a full-time waiter at like 14 years old. Waiter didn't show up, hands me a pen and a pad, go take orders. So,
Beautiful.
that's kind of how I got into the business. So fast forward to college, I think, Mark, you might have been part of it. Roommates would always bust my chops and say, hey, what are you doing in college? Just go open up a pizzeria. That's where you're going to be anyway. But I was always kind of mechanically inclined. I always liked the engineering. So I kind of went through it. It was really interesting to me. I liked it. I enjoyed it. Worked for a great company. I think, Mark, I was telling you the story the other day. And after about a year and a half, so I got a really good job offer. Couldn't expect more from a company. But, I guess I was a little arrogant, right? A year and a half out of college, I sit down with my boss. I said, hey, where do you see me? Where's my future in this company? It's a very flat company. So he said, maybe within 5 years, you develop relationships with the doctors. And that was it. I tuned him out. I walked in the next day with a resignation letter, and I went into the restaurant business.
Why did 5 years trigger you?
It just seemed so far away. I was like out of college, year and a half already. I want to see some more. I want to see movement. Like I want to see, progress. Tell me you're going to move me to a different department, learn something new. Again, you're young. I was like 24, 23 at the time.
Yep. I was just about to ask. Yeah, it's amazing. Your dad made his move when he was about 25. You did the same. That's,
Yeah,
you were. Your job wasn't, and because obviously we know each other. Your job was like 2 times the typical college graduate in terms of compensation. I mean, you really had I would say, top 5% job of everybody that we graduated from. So
yeah, I did really well with them. They made me a good offer. I did well there. I gained a lot of respect in the year and a half that I was there, and maybe that kind of contributed to the fact of like, hey, I want more. So when I heard the whole 5-year thing, it was just.
But you had obviously the 5-year was a trigger. You had plans going on in the background, right? That you were kind of running parallel paths.
Well, yeah. So to rewind a little bit, at the time, my brother was operating a restaurant with my mother in Manhattan. He actually had a motorcycle injury, so he couldn't go to work. My mother was tending to my grandmother. She wasn't doing well, so I had to kind of shift gears a little bit, go to work early in the morning so I can leave a little earlier to go to the restaurant, to run the restaurant, and then kind of do it all over again. So that kind of got me back into like the taste of the business, because at that point I probably was removed from it for probably about 4 or 5 years. So that's how I got kind of back into it. And then that's what kind of gets fueled the whole abrupt, resignation.
yeah, it sounds like it was abrupt, but it also sounds like it should have been, I would think, maybe comfortable is not the right word, but maybe it was comfortable for you because you've already been exposed to the business, many of the parts of the business.
Yeah, I think not only being comfortable within that business, having support of someone, my family that's been in the business, and then, still living at home. I wasn't married at the time. Actually, I got engaged 2 months prior to me resigning. So my wife, we were engaged as an engineer. 2 months later, I wound up becoming a small business owner. So that was a big change for her.
What was it about the corporate? Obviously, the corporate world has its perks, but obviously, you were weighing things like, all right, independence. What was some of the thought process on you? It seems like you were almost 5 years and 24 hours later, you submit a resignation letter. So that didn't happen in a 24-hour period. You were kind of thinking about being an entrepreneur. What was your thought process?
I think it's hard to call, but I think what had a lot to do with it is the fact that if I don't do it now, it's a lot harder to do later.
Right.
Like Mark gave you a lot of credit than everybody else who opens up a business later on in life where you have a lot more responsibilities.
Right.
And you don't have that financial stability that you do. I kind of went all in. I made no money the first year, like literally no money. It was a really rough start to opening that business. I didn't know the business. I grew up in a pizzeria business. I opened up a full-scale restaurant with a bar that I didn't know had a mixed drinks. Just everything about it was totally different.
Well, let's go into. You're talking to Il Fornetto, right?
Well, yeah. So I opened up. So 6 months later, when I resigned, I kind of opened up within 6 months, actually less, opened up Il Fornetto, which was a restaurant in Sheepshead Bay, Brooklyn, on the waterfront. Just an opportunity came by and kind of just took advantage of it.
How long did it take you from signing a lease at Il Fornetto in Brooklyn to open? You had to build out or you had to renovate?
It was 1 month.
1 month.
Wow.
1 month.
I'm curious. What did you, during that 6-month period, while you were waiting for your resignation to kick in, I guess you gave them 6 months notice or something like that?
No, I gave them, well, at the time they were going through so Stryker, which is the company that bought out Osteonics, they were going through a merger. So like my timing was the worst for them because
Wow.
I resigned like the week before they announced the merger and layoffs. So there wasn't really much notice. They didn't need much notice from me. I gave them as much as they needed. I think I wound up staying there a month after I gave them the resignation. And it was just at the point right when the merger actually happened. So they wanted me out before the merger took place, which made sense for me too.
But I think it's
Well, the reason I asked the question is because, in the midst of all of that, that's just a teeny bit stressful. But in the midst of all of that, you're making connections to suppliers. You're trying to line up people that are going to be waiters, waitresses, busboys, scullery help, cooks, head chef.
Well, no, it was more like
That's everything.
I was looking for a location first. So I didn't have a location at that time.
Gotcha.
So
Okay.
I left. So after I left the job, my last day, I worked with my dad a little bit just to kind of have something to do while I was looking for locations and opportunities. So Il Fornetto, that location really happened probably no more than 60 days. By the time I wanted to do it, negotiated the lease, took over the business, or would not even take over the business, took over the location. There was no business. It was a fully built out restaurant. Went in there, kind of did a very simple, what we call a lipstick job, where it's just, freshen it up a little bit. I didn't make any major changes and we were open. And I kind of, it was all new to me, changed the wheels around the track, as we went. And
did you start with a general manager or was that you?
We did. No, I did start with a general manager. So my partner at the time, which we stayed partners throughout the whole 22-year run. He was in a restaurant business for many years, but he wasn't actively involved in the business as much. So he had a general manager that he kind of brought in to help open up. That general manager didn't work out too well. It was only there for about 3 months. And that was really it. I find in the restaurant business, there's managers that are good at opening restaurants, and then there's managers that are good at running restaurants. It's very hard to find one that do both.
Right.
This particular manager, he was really good at opening restaurants. Couldn't have done it without him. Give him all the credit for that. But when it came down to the day-to-day, maybe it was just too monotonous for him. It wasn't exciting enough or whatever. It just didn't work out.
So how'd you recruit a new manager if that didn't work out?
That was it. That was me.
Oh, so then you took over that job.
I was the only person with the key. So I opened and closed every day, 7 days a week for about a year.
Wow. So how many hours was that in a day?
Forget it. We opened up at 11, so you get there at 10, and we closed at 1 o'clock in the morning sometimes. So you're going from 10 a.m. to 2 a.m.
That's a grind.
Long time.
7 days a week.
That's a grind. And how long did that go on for?
So I didn't bring a manager back in till about, I would say, he was kind of a server slash had some responsibilities to close sometimes. So I was getting married. So I got married. So I got engaged the year later. So it took me about a year and a half, about a year, let's say a year. Because a year later, it was my wedding after I opened. And that was kind of like when I had to really find someone to run the business because I wasn't going to be there for that, whatever, honeymoon period.
Right.
But otherwise, up until the day I got married, I was there every day.
And how many did you have on staff, on payroll?
We probably had 30 people on staff.
That's a pretty big operation.
Yeah, that's a lot of responsibility, especially if you're the general manager and you're ordering the. I take it you're handling all the supplies, you're handling the tablecloths,
Yeah,
the
I was doing all the
silverware,
order. I mean, there was a chef in the kitchen.
the food.
The chef kind of handled a lot of the, back of house, what they call like the kitchen food,
Right.
Inventory and things like that. But all everything else, scheduling, it's the rest of the business there was nobody else. It was just me.
Yeah, pure
So
startup.
you learn quick. It's the way to do it. Get thrown on fire.
So if you're gonna, corporate background for whatever it was, a couple years out of school, and then you dive in, you own your own business, and you're working whatever 75 hours a week plus, huge grind. Were you successful at hiring your first general manager after that year, or did you run through a couple? Or
so again, go back to my dad. My dad's good friend was a server for many, many years. He kind of wanted to get out of the server. He was getting older, he's my dad's age. He wanted to get more into management. He came in as a server originally, like just to kind of see how it was there. And then I made him or offered him the position as a manager. He was I was always the general manager. So I always took care of payroll. I always took care of all the operational stuff, even scheduling for the most part in the beginning. He was really there to take care of the day-to-day operations as far as like staff, making sure customers were happy. That was like kind of his main thing, like just run the floor, as we call it in the restaurant.
Well, if we kind of take a step back, because Il Fornetto was what, 20 years, right?
20. Well, it was a 20-year lease. I got 2 extensions, so 22 years I was there.
Yeah, so that's unheard of in a restaurant business, right? The failure rate's notoriously high. How do you look at it? Is it like the first 3 years are kind of the same, and then you get 3 through 5? What are the phases of that 22-year run?
I think like any business, I think there's a lot of effort and time and grind you got to put in to get it going, to get it to a point where it's financially stable, right? So you're profitable, there are systems in place. So I think, I don't know if you can really put a timeline to it. Typically they say in a restaurant business, if you can't iron out all the kinks within the first 2 years, it's not going to happen. Right. It might be different in manufacturing. I'm not sure, maybe the timeline's a little longer there, but I think there's a lot of effort and time that goes into that. And then you kind of you can ride the wave, reap the benefits of having a business that's kind of, successful because it's profitable at that point and systems are in place. So you can kind of relax a little bit if you want to and ride that wave. And I think a lot of people do that. I think once a business gets to a point where, you feel like, oh, I can't really do much more, you kind of just ride it out. And, don't get me wrong, you can't just let it go on its own because it'll fall. But to get it to the next level, I think it requires even more time and energy than you did originally to get it to the next bump. So if you look at a graph, I think it just shoots up, kind of levels off, and then shoots up again if you really want to get to the next level.
Well, I wanted to ask you, we talk about, and we've talked about this on previous podcasts too, for startups, or in your case, coming in on a business that was basically our business that plateaued. Mark came in and was bound and determined to grow this baby significantly. But we talk about the first big win, especially for a startup. First big win meaning, the first positive response that you get from the business where you look at that and go, yeah, I'm doing the right thing. That all the time, all the effort, all the sacrifices are worth it. Where was your first big win? When were you finally convinced that, you know what, this place is going to work?
I think the big win was once you start putting the right team together, and you start having people you can depend on. To me, that was like, all right, there's something here. I can make a run of this.
Gotcha. Yeah.
Because in the beginning, you're losing. You have a lot of turnover. People come and go. It's not for them. Either you're not for them or they're not for you. So there's a lot of turnover going on. So I think once you get to the stable staff, which I think is probably number two. Number one is probably location. Location was,
Yep.
really, really important. But team is like, you need to have a good team.
And how did you do the recruiting process? Is it just gut
It
feel,
just
or
happened. I think I put so much time and energy, and I was always there. I know that you mentioned this in a previous podcast about like team. It's a staff is a team, not a family.
right?
I got to be honest with you. You spent so much time. I spent more time at work than I did at home. I mean, at the time, I spent no time at home.
Right.
I mean, I don't even know till this day how my wife wound up marrying me walking
Right.
down that aisle that day, because I probably didn't see her for a full day for a year and a half before that.
Right.
Which is crazy.
Well, we'll ask her. We'll have her come on. We'll ask
We're
her.
gonna bring her on. But for, I think, just being there all the time, and you do develop a certain relationship with the staff, that it almost does feel like family.
It does.
But you're right. You're 100% right, Mark. It's not family. It is a team, because every decision you make is either a business decision or an out of business decision. So if you develop a relationship and you feel bad to reprimand somebody, or you let things slide, that's an out of business decision.
Right.
So all you're doing is a disservice, to them and also to the business.
How much turnover does the restaurant business in general have?
I don't know what the exact number is, but it's a lot. I mean, it's pretty high. It's probably, I don't really have any, facts about this, but I got to assume it's one of the highest turnover rates.
Got to be. Right.
Right.
Well,
But,
from
that manager that I was talking about, he was there for 18 years. The manager, I want to bring a second manager. I started to grow other locations. So second manager, he was there to the day we closed. Also about 18. He came in a little bit later. So he was there for about 18 years. Mark, you actually met the server Vito. Remember Vito?
Yep. Oh yeah. Yeah. Tendonitis in his elbow.
Yeah, exactly. He was actually part of the hiring team when we first opened, and he was there till the last day we closed 22 years later.
That's amazing.
So there was a lot of staff. I would say about 70% of the staff was probably there for 10 years plus.
wow, that's actually pretty good.
You had a core team that had some
Yeah,
great longevity.
exactly.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Which was the success of that restaurant, hands down, no doubt about it. It wouldn't give me the opportunity to go do other ventures, and it wouldn't have made that restaurant as successful as it was.
Oh, for sure.
Well, what I remember, because while you were, you were 25 when you started, right?
Yep, 25.
So I think at that time, Kim and I were living in Cincinnati, Ohio, or Norwalk and then Ohio. We lived in 3 different states while you were starting and then growing the business. Right. What I always remember, if we go a long time without talking, you were in some big renovation project, right? You were pouring money back into the business.
Well, that's, I would say, a big part of the success, I think, especially when it comes to like hospitality. We did a lot of catering. We had a dedicated catering room where people would have events. You don't want to go to the same place all the time. It has to be fresh, has to be clean, has to be new. So I think that was a big part of it. So every year I always try to do a project, either to expand or to renovate or to do something different. I think that's a really important factor. I guess like in manufacturing, you guys have to invest in equipment. You can't rely on your old equipment.
True.
You always want to kind of get ahead. If they're more efficient, you can, become more profitable if you're making an investment in your business. I think is important.
I think the challenging part for a business owner is let's say you make $100, just for a round number, right? And the project, whether it's putting a new room on a restaurant or a new piece of machinery in a manufacturing place, what if that requires you to put $90 back in? And you're like, oh my God, this thing's a cash hog. All I'm doing is making money and putting it all right back into it. And then how long does that go on for before you start making a living, right? So it's tough.
It's an interesting business because what we do here, we deal with one customer at a time. We have to make one customer at a time happy. You've got a room with 75, 80, 100 people in it. you're trying to make every one of them happy all at the same time.
Right. That's hard.
It's a very challenging job. I've got some very good friends that two sets of very good friends that's a husband and wife team that both started restaurants, and they still have them. And the challenges that they've been through, well, we'll talk about COVID in a bit, but the challenges they go through were just absolutely astounding. When did you feel, at what point did you feel comfortable that you were hitting your stride? The restaurant, Il Fornetto, was hitting its stride. And I don't know that you're ever comfortable, because you're always looking for bigger, better improvements, right, that sort of thing. And there's always the day-to-day running of the business. But when did you start to feel like, you know what, we're good here? This is going to work.
So restaurants is a real estate game, right? Unless you're doing catering out the door, basically you have a table. Once that table's occupied, you know, that's it. There's nothing else you can do. I guess you can raise prices,
sure,
whatever, to increase dollars, but to a certain point, you can outgrow your location, right? So I think for me, once I took full use of the space and everything, there was really nowhere else to grow as far as space-wise, and the seats were full, and we're, doing really well. That was a point where I said, hey, we're good here. It's time to go now and open up and try something else, somewhere else, and try to run up, multiple locations. I think that was always just kind of in me. Just wanted to do, a little bit more and see just test things out, try different things.
How does it go when you're a successful single unit operator, call it Il Fornetto, multi-years, you got a decade under your belt? You decided to become multi-location when? Year 15 or?
No, our first one was 20 years, actually 3 years after we opened.
Oh, okay. What was being the sole proprietor of Il Fornetto and then eventually becoming a multi-unit operator? What were you had to learn things that you didn't have either in your corporate job? You kind of learned it on the fly. Did you do your own bookkeeping?
Yeah, did my own bookkeeping.
So that was an area you learned from the ground up, right?
Yeah, just bought QuickBooks and started plugging away. Actually, I started with an Excel spreadsheet.
Yeah.
Then I figured out real quick this was for the birds. So I was like, someone figured this out. I don't want to reinvent the wheel here. So I got a copy of QuickBooks and started plugging away with QuickBooks and kind of learned it.
And how about promotion, marketing, getting the word out of the business? You learned that from the ground up too, I assume.
Well, yeah. I didn't take marketing in Northeastern, but
right.
I think restaurants are a little different. And obviously over the 20 years, marketing's changed so much, right? Where when we first opened, you were basically relying on the local newspaper, because anything more than that was just too expensive for
right.
restaurants to go into. You're competing with, ad space that the big corporate guys are doing. So you had to, local newspapers. They usually do like a roundup of like different restaurants in the area. And, a little bit of that, a little bit of email. Email just started back then, right? Just starting getting going. So try to get an email list going. Just the basic, one-on-one marketing.
So how many years of Il Fornetto before Gabriella came along, your firstborn?
She was born in 2002, so 3 years.
So 3 years. So as the family starts to grow, you're grinding away 75 hours. How'd you balance it all?
Well, it tailed off a little bit. It was the first year was that time intensive, like 75 hours a week. And then as, the manager kind of got up and running, you would take a day off here or there, but it was still always, 60 plus hours. I don't think I've ever worked less than 60 hours a week.
So it's almost impossible to compare the two, but if you stayed in corporate, less total hours or still, how does it compare, the two worlds?
Well, I was in corporate so little, right? I was only there for a year and a half, but right. I was usually the first guy there, and I was usually the last guy to leave. So yep. I guess it's in my DNA.
That's how it was for me too. But so the only regret that I have is I didn't do what Angelo did at 25. I did at 40. Well, that's the big difference.
You pick your friends very well. This is a club,
Yeah.
Getting up at 4:00 in the morning, and it's
he's a late riser. He never he's a
Well, when you're getting home at 3 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah, that
It's
gives you,
not
gives you a good
hard to
excuse.
get up
We're not
early.
getting home at 3 o'clock. We're not getting home at 3 o'clock in the morning.
I usually catch you on the way in, Mark.
I know.
I'm coming home when you're going
I
in.
know.
Well, it begs the question, and it may sound like a stupid question, but at the beginning of a startup, work-life balance is probably we talked about this,
right.
and I just get so frustrated with people that you should play as hard as you work. No, that's not how life works. Especially if you're an entrepreneur or you're involved with a startup business and you're starting from scratch. No, you're working your ass off. Period. End of story. And there are sacrifices that you're going to make, and there are sacrifices that your family has to make. Yeah. When did you get to a point where you could actually start to, feel comfortable with not working a 15-hour day? Never. Like I said, you pick your friends very well, my friend.
Yeah, listen, when I opened up, it was all in. You're talking about 24/7, just
right.
That was it. I mean, if I didn't have the support at home like I did, it would never have been possible.
When I made the decision, when my brother made the decision, Mick made the decision, when Mark and Kim made the decision, we made the decisions with our wives. The story's always the same. You better have a strong spouse. You better have someone who gets it, understands, knows what's needed to be done. And it's just, we did a whole podcast on it. It's really, really crucial and really, really important. Otherwise, you've got enough stress. You got your money on the line. You've got other people that are depending on you to make sure this business stays in business. And it's not just your family. It's your team at the job. So it's a very stressful situation. So,
I think you guys brought up in one of your podcasts about having your spouse in the business. So for me, it was totally opposite. I mean, obviously, when you have 4 kids at home, there's not really much bandwidth you have to help out with anything else.
Right.
But I kind of agree and disagree in some parts. I think if they're too involved in a business, it doesn't give you that break, because businesses are stressful. And then you want to bring it home together. And I don't know how that would work out. I don't know if I would be able to do that. But I would agree with you where it's good to have, I think you mentioned like they should have some like role in the company, whether it's a bookkeeping role like Kim has or whatever it may be, which will kind of just put them in tune with what your day was like or what you're, doing when you're not home for these 12 to 14 hours a day.
Yeah, I couldn't imagine a hands-on partner that happens to be your spouse, right? So both at the same place all day long. That's a recipe for disaster, I think.
I just, where's the break? Like, how do you get away from it?
Yeah.
Take it home. Like, I don't know. Maybe some people can cut it off. Like, I don't know how that's possible, but I definitely wouldn't recommend that.
No. Now one thing that, thank God, Kim, we call her the catch-all, right? So as good as anybody, if you ask me to do something simple like a Zoom call or set something up or administrative or file something with taxes, I'll screw it up every which way to Sunday, right? So Kim is good at that. She's detail-oriented, or else I would implode. So one thing I've learned is, what do I really suck at, and find someone else to do it, or else that'll consume a lion's share of my mental energy.
You have to be allowed to do those things that you do well,
right?
And hope that you learn enough about the other things that you can, get those expedited, get those done, with a modicum of success.
Right.
But I can't stress enough. My wife basically took over our household, and that was great because I was always here. Ken was always here. Mick was always. It's just you can't get away from that.
I'm curious on if you look at the environment of operating a business now versus when you started at 25 or even to 25 to 30. What are the big changes that you see?
Margin.
Tougher?
Margin's way different. Profit margin's way different. I think.
Driven by inflation, or what's the drivers?
I think every aspect, right? So for us, it's cost of goods. Cost of goods today, especially with inflation's through the roof. But even over the years, they just kept going up and up and up. I think wages have changed a lot. And then also real estate, like rent. Like rent is just way more expensive now than it was back then, and even as a proportion of business. you know? So I think a lot of the margin is just totally different. Like you can really have one restaurant years ago and kind of hit it out of the park, and you can be set for life on that one restaurant. I think today it's kind of hard. I think
So
margin's
the
a lot
environment, if you had to open up a restaurant today, a lot harder than 25 years ago then.
Well, there's more competition, I guess, depending on where you are, but for where I operate, I think there's a lot more competition now. Like when I opened Il Fornetto in Sheepshead Bay, there weren't many. I mean, there was a decent amount of restaurants, but not like today. Like today, every space is a food establishment. So you're fighting for that dining dollar, right? Whether we were an Italian seafood restaurant, but at the end of the day, you're still competing with the sushi place. You're still competing with the Greek restaurant. You're competing with that dining dollar. So I think, population increased definitely, but I think proportionally, the amount of food establishments is much higher than it was back then. More competition, like even today, with the Food Network, everybody's a chef now.
Right.
So I think you got to up your game. I think back then you kind of can get away with a lot more. I think it just got harder. It's a lot harder today.
What's the motivation to, random question, have you ever thought about going outside the restaurant industry?
Into a different business?
Yeah, to try and buy a business outside of it. Yep.
Put the engineering hat back on?
Or any type of business.
Yeah, definitely. I would, I always thought about it.
But let me get your thoughts on a couple things. And we talk a little bit about, you're a business owner, you're unique in that you've already got 23 years of business ownership experience, and you're 48, right?
Yep.
You're my age. At any given time in America, there's 2.5 million small businesses for sale. I don't know how they quite identify small, if it's under 10 million in revenue or what. And most of them won't have a successful exit as the owner, right? So curious on your thoughts on that. And then on the flip side, I think the business ownership rate in America, percentage of all people that own a business, is only 8%. So those two things as facts. And then I'm curious, you as a dad, for your kids, would you want to see your kids own a business, knowing what it's all about? Give me your thoughts on why so few businesses sell successfully. And then at the same time, why is there only 8% of America that owns a business? And then what's your thoughts on, is this something that you want for your kids or not?
So I think, to the first point, restaurant business doesn't have a very high multiple when it comes to their sales. So I think when you have a profitable restaurant, unless someone's looking to acquire it into a group, they might pay you top dollar for it. But at the end of the day, you're actually going to be walking away and leaving money on the table.
So your thoughts on your offspring, would you want to see them go into small business ownership if they wanted to?
I think we talked about this a little bit too. I think a lot of people don't go into, to answer your second question about why is there only 8% or whatever it is, right, of people in small business. I think it's hard. I think it's hard to, so you have to be financially stable, right? You're going to open up a business, there's no guaranteed paycheck, right? So now how are you going to live, right? So if you don't have those means to be financially stable for that whatever time you want, whether it's a year or 2 years, it's going to be hard to do. And usually when people open their business, they're putting every penny they have into that business.
Sure.
So how do you put every penny you have into a business and not know how you're going to eat tomorrow? I think it's hard.
That sums it up right there.
Yeah, pretty much.
That catches it.
And then I think with college today, I think a lot of people go to college because they make it really easy. Why do you go to college? Well, I'm going to give you a loan. Who's going to give you a loan for a small business?
Nobody.
Right? Really, really hard to get. So they're going to give you a loan. You're going to go to school. I mean, obviously you have to do your part, but you graduate from school, you'll get a job. And based on that job, you can pay back your loan. So now, it's a lot easier. It's a lot more secure. That's why so many people go to college. But it's a whole nother conversation. I don't think college is worth it for every business. I wish I would have saved my $100,000 in 7 years.
we talk a lot about this. It's Northeastern's now room and board $78,000. That's the price list. Who knows what they're giving away in discounts and all that? But it's a big, huge sticker price.
I think it cost us $100,000, right?
Right.
5 years.
That's right.
It was $100,000.
It's going to be 5 years. It'll be pushing $400,000 by the time if Dominic chose to go there. I mean, who's got $400,000 burning a hole in their pocket?
No.
The government.
The government does, right? So they'll finance it, and then, but yeah, the math is out of whack on the whole thing. Well, I think the crux of it is, let's say you've got some level of financial needs. In your example of a restaurant being sold, what'd you say, 2 times profit?
Typically, yes, 2 to 2.5.
Okay, so let's say the restaurant's doing $250,000. You can feasibly buy it for $500,000, 600,000, whatever it is, right?
Yeah.
Could you finance it with an SBA loan?
I think they're hard because, typically restaurants are associated with a lease, right? If there's land involved and like the property's involved, that's a whole different story.
Yep.
But I think if it's strictly the business that's being leased, I think it's very hard to make the economics work.
To service the debt, you're saying?
Right.
The service the debt. Well, yeah, even for the lender, why am I going to give you a loan for 15 years? Because it's like anything else, right? You have to be able to pay it, right? So the business has to support your payment, but you don't have the time because you're only on a 10-year lease.
So you got to have a long-term lease
to make the numbers work,
which is probably rare.
Well, dare we bring up the elephant in the room?
What's that?
COVID.
Yeah, why not?
Yeah. Well, everybody got touched by COVID in some way, shape, or form. Small businesses got killed during COVID. And, can you relate some of your story about that? I remember March 18th like it was yesterday, 2020. So.
Yeah. So obviously the first, few months were kind of crazy because we didn't know what was going on, how long it would last.
Right.
So I think that was a lot of waste. Especially when it closed down, we had all this food inventory. It's perishable. It's all garbage. So there's a lot of loss there. But I think for the most part, restaurants in particular that had a delivery business kind of present in their business
mm-hmm.
were able to survive and did well. I think some people did better than others.
Now we had we talked about this constantly. I'll never forget that weekend that Mark and I spoke. Okay, what are we going to do? Because at that point, in our case, it was Governor Murphy here in New Jersey. We didn't know what was going to come down, the following Monday. All we knew was that left and right businesses were being told to shut down.
Yeah, that's the scariest thing is when it's taken out of your hands and the government forces a shutdown. That's just
in 3 days.
Right.
Now it's not like we didn't anticipate that something was going to happen, but we had no idea that it was going to be as drastic as it was. And the saying, I just started saying this to anybody that cared to listen. It's easy to shut things down. It's hard as hell. It's hard as hell to start them up again. Okay. Yeah. But it's easy to shut them down. You can just, with a stroke of a pen, you can shut down one whole massive part of your economy. And that's exactly what happened.
Well, look at the world economy.
Yeah.
Look how long it's taken to get back to normal. We're still not there yet.
Yeah. And
they can't figure out how to get shipping containers unloaded.
Well, you know what? What's interesting about what goes on, and obviously I know we're not interested in getting into a political discussion, a pure political discussion. But the bottom line is, small business in this country has to make its own way. It's the bottom line. You're not going to get an assist. There are programs out there that you can go and learn about, and government's provided those for years and years. And again, I'm not sure any of us wants that, but the bottom line is everybody else is getting that. Small business, you're taking all the risk. You're essentially putting in all the work. You're handling all the. We talk about stress. We talk about work ethic. It's to me, it's a remarkable group of people that do that, and there's a ton of them here in this country, and they never get credit. It's my favorite stories are the ones. Oh, you own a business? Yeah. Oh man, that's fantastic. What kind of car do you drive? A Hyundai, for crying out loud. What kind of car do you drive? And first of all, why do you care what kind of car I drive? Well, you own your own business. You can write your own ticket. We're not writing tickets here at Paver Art. Okay, that's the bottom line. And
Now
I get a little, I get a little unnerved sometimes when people say that. It's not, this is not as easy as people who are not involved with startups or entrepreneurs think that it might be. I can't imagine what you went through when you started, when you gave your notice, quit what by any other measure was a very good job with good pay, and decided, you know what, I'm going to throw caution to the wind. That's a hell of a decision there, Angelo. I'm sorry, it just is.
Well, I'm sure you guys, when you guys opened up Paper Rock, it was the same thing. You guys were all
Yeah,
working
but there's a small difference. There were three of us that had to make that decision, okay, and three spouses that had to make that decision too. None of them was really technically involved with the business, but the bottom line was they were handling all the other stuff when we were here. But there were three of us, okay, not one, three,
Right.
and it's kudos to you, my friend.
I think,
Kudos to
Andrew brought up the whole thing, which I completely agree with. And I'm let's keep the government out of small business, out of business, period.
Agreed.
That's generally my
I
modus
couldn't-
operandi.
I couldn't agree more.
However, because you're right, if you're 18 years old out of high school, you're not getting that loan to open a small business, but you'll get $200,000 of debt if you want to go to college, right?
Absolutely.
So there's clearly a thing there. However, there's one exception. You can get a 7A SBA-backed loan for a good cash flowing business with assets, or a 504 loan for real estate. That's how I bought LM Foods. Without the SBA, at 40 years old, I'm not buying LM Foods, right? Now, we had investor money and all of that.
And you had an already established business.
Right. There is a
You're not getting that. You're not getting that at 18 years old.
No, you're not. No way. So now the government makes it very easy. They guarantee 75% of a bank's risk to get that loan. So if the bank, and then you got assets in the business, and then I got to personally guarantee all the debt, right? So the bank is generally covered, but it's a good program. So for the people, at 25, I don't know if you're getting it either. If you've got a resume and you got a good business identified, the SBA program will get you into the entrepreneurial game.
Right.
Got to find the right business. Which is why I'm kind of, curious at these people that have the entrepreneurial itch at some point in their life. They can go acquire a business. Now, it's not easy. You need
Right.
people that have done it before. I had a great equity partner that was backing me to figure out how to do it, but there is a segment of the world. Now, some of these people, there's a whole segment of the world called search fund entrepreneurs. These are kids I say kids, they're 30 years old. They typically graduate from one of the top MBA programs, and then they start a search fund for $500,000 so they can draw a salary and hopefully buy a business. Maybe, maybe not. But that's a whole segment of entrepreneurial sectors it's really growing out there. How big is it? I'm not quite sure, but the government does have an SBA program that makes it, if you want to go buy a business, you can figure out how to buy a business, finance it.
Well,
you still need the skill set, you still need the resume.
And you glossed over that pretty quickly when you said you had to personally guarantee the loan.
Right.
Okay.
There's risk involved.
No stress there.
Right.
There's
risk involved. Right.
How the hell did you sleep?
Right.
How did any of us sleep? Jeez. Anyway, it's a subject that's near and dear to my heart, and I a lot of my friends are business owners, and thrilled to meet you, Angelo.
What
your
advice?
story's fantastic.
If you had to part some wisdom or advice on people that are thinking about it, or kind of they're in that 9 to 5, but they've been thinking about it, what advice would you have for either prospective entrepreneurs or people that are in it today? What comes to mind as things that if you had to kind of do it over again and you had a mentor, what would be some of those areas you'd want to impart some wisdom on?
Well, I think it's depending on what stage in their life they're in, but I think you really got to take a look at the fact of the financial, responsibility just to go into business, and again, to be able to live while you're running that business. I think there's the financial aspect of it. You got to make sure that you're set up the right way, because the last thing you want to do is go all in on something and have to cut it short because you're just not financially prepared.
Right.
Right. And I think the other thing is the whole, work-home balance. I think, for me, I wasn't smart enough to figure out how to balance it too much. So I was all in.
Here.
So you have to make sure that there's a solution to that. I think those are two big things. And then the other thing is, you have to really enjoy it. Because if you really don't enjoy it, it's really hard to be successful at it, because it's just so much time, so much effort. And if you have to wake up in the morning and say, I gotta go to work today, that's the
Yep.
problem. That's a sign that it's time to shift gears.
Yeah, couldn't agree more.
Yeah.
We need to rethink this.
His
Yeah.
story is interesting. The thing that I think you got right that I would encourage people, the only regret I have, I didn't do it quick enough. I probably waited an extra 5 years. I would have thought 30 for me, and the kind of debt that I was ready at 35, waited till 40 because I wasn't even thinking about that. I was, to your point, you would have worked 70 hours a week, whether you were in corporate or your own business. I'm the same way. I was always the first one there, last one to leave. I would encourage people, do it as early as possible. As early as you got confidence and the financial wherewithal, earlier is better, especially. But imagine doing it if you had teenagers at home and then thinking about doing it, that'd be nearly impossible.
Yeah.
That's hard.
Just the financial burden becomes harder, right? So it's a bigger hurdle to jump as you go, later in life.
Right.
So,
well, look, I think, first off, thank you for taking the time and chatting with us here.
Genuine pleasure to meet you, Angela. I hope we talk more. No.
Sounds great. Thanks, guys.